but it was a broad benchmark. I have seen Howard Gardner, my professor at Harvard. He once made a visit to India about 10 years back, and he famously came to the Times of India headline. He says it's going to take 100 years for Indian education system to reform. People think America is soft power. Actually, no. America is soft power on useless things in life like junk food and Hollywood. And losers like myself probably took up commerce and tried to pursue chartered accountancy as an option.
We are, I believe, sitting at the cusp of technological revolution, which is changing the way we look at education.
I managed to get grades in 12th. That's the beauty of CBSE. You really don't have to be a smart kid to do well in grade 12. You can figure it out.
Hello Vishnu, welcome to One Young India. Today I'm really fortunate to be sitting across you and talking about the education sector in the country. You are the CEO of Heritage Group of Schools. We call it Heritage Xperiential Learning System. And you've had your masters, if I'm not wrong, please feel free to correct me. You've done your masters from Harvard and masters in education, right?
That was a mistake, yes.
Okay, it was a mistake. I'd love to hear more about that. And the premise, we are, I believe, sitting at the cusp of technological revolution, which is changing the way we look at education. And to be talking to somebody who has been leading schools in experiential learning systems, and your company is also called as Experiential Learning Systems and Learn Experiential Learning Systems, I want to understand, what made you start the organization? What is this experiential learning? For the broader audience to understand in ways that they would be able to absorb.
See, the fundamental premise of why we started the Heritage Schools almost 18 years back is starting with the frustration of how traditional schools have been for the last 100 odd years. Things haven't changed much since the time the first public schools came up in the pre-industrialized world, in the Victorian era. In fact, I remember in one of the workshops of sharing pictures shot in the early 20th century, or the late 19th century. And we starting to find the pictures then, shot about 120 years back, and pictures now. There do not much differences other than probably the dressing sense of changing things like that. But the fundamental structure of a classroom unit is the same. Fundamental premises of learning have been the same. So the Heritage started as an experiment in some sense of how do we relook at the model of learning in the K-12 space to ensure that children learn what is relevant, meaningful, and also what helps them discover themselves. So that's the motivation of why we started this. It's got nothing to do with technology, nothing to do with it. I think technology is in service with the larger vision of making learning more real and engaging for the learners.
Am I safe in assuming that you come from the school who says, we don't need no education with the Pink Floyd thing, like...
No, actually not. Although I started my career with that assumption.
Yeah.
Personally, my own journey, I went to one of the top schools in the city of Chennai. And Chennai, as you would know, is a very traditional city, known for exporting every second kid to get a green card, go to do MS in the US. And in fact, I think 1 in 3 of my batchmate went to Bitspinani, where you come from. 1 in 4 probably went to an IIT, and the rest will probably go to an REC. The NITs are not RECs then. And losers like myself probably took up commerce and tried to pursue chartered accountancy as an option. So I come from a school which prided itself to exporting kids to some of the top engineering schools and eventually to the US. I don't have much of my classmates actually, they're not in India, they're around the world doing some interesting stuff. But students like myself were sitting in the last bench. I managed to get grades in 12th. That's the beauty of CBSE. You really don't have to be a smart kid to do well in grade 12. You can figure it out. So, but I found all my learning outside the classroom, not in the classroom. And I think that's true of learners of my generation, and true of most children around the world, not just in India, even now, that we love schools not for the engaging learning experiences in the classroom, but because of what's happening around the classroom. Your friends you make, lovely teachers you meet, you always have one teacher who always had faith in you, and that spark kicked off something, etc. So I came to the school of that we don't need no education within the traditional confines of classrooms. But then as I spent time in the world of consulting, I did a traditional MBA, did consulting, and I started looking at learning models around the world. It so happened I had consulting assignments with some of the top school chains in the world. And I saw this as purely a consulting assignment. I realized there are other models available of learning. This dominant logic that do real work you have to get out of the classroom is not true. There are models available in the world where the classroom can be your primary source of learning, and that can be engaging, meaningful, relevant, rigorous, and real life. So, and now I don't believe that you don't need you need education. It's a myth that children will find their calling on their own. It's a myth that schools are not required to do progress. Like I met a parent in the morning today who wanted to do homeschooling. The answer to them is, yeah, homeschooling is great, but you still need an inspiring adult. You still need a group of co-learners or peers. You still need a reason why I'm learning what I'm learning. And those schools provide awareness. For most kids, schools are a great thing. Just that schools have to reorient themselves to make it relevant for the child. We're going to live in a time and age which we can't predict. Yeah.
So essentially, schools have to turn, like if I'm not wrong, they now have to become truly learning spaces first. Because from what my understanding is that when the Industrial Revolution started, the standardized education of producing these managers for the factories and so on and so forth, that is why we had a mold and people were not satisfied with it. But now we are in the fourth industrial revolution, going into maybe the fifth with the age of AI and everything coming in. So the school definitely plays that important role in being a place where the students can get the sort of mentorship, the sort of support that they're looking at, and most importantly, the peer group.
That's right.
So
So you would use the word learning spaces. That most schools now are teaching spaces. They're not learning spaces. So the primary focus of any school is teaching. They need to flip it and say, we're not there to teach, we're there to help children learn. And that shift takes a while for making that happen. And once it becomes a learning space, then magic happens for children. Not just in terms of building skills, capacities, mindsets, but they also find, more importantly, which I think schools often talk less about, they find their calling. See, the purpose of a school is just not creating managers, etc., which is also important, especially in a developing nation like ours. Not everybody should. And it's also not meant to be, not everybody should find their calling with musician, etc. You also need people who are great managers and administrators. In fact, you see Southeast Asia, Japan, the classic example. I really wish we had more of Japan in our founding years than of USSR, for example. That's a monumental blunder we made in the first 20, 30 years. But what is that reference point? And look at Japan. The reason I like Japan is I think we've got a great mix of great managers, great administrators, great innovators. And I think that country has produced a wide spectrum of workforce which is the service of the nation.
absolutely. I mean, you mentioned Japan. Interestingly, when we were usually talking and analyzing different countries, it happens to be that most of the things that you are using today, for example, the camera on which we're shooting this, Sony, like comes from Japan. Toyota comes from Japan. Honda comes from Japan. Right? So in terms of it's just pure tech, but at the same time, I feel the culture that they have, like from what I've learned about their education system, the ethics of being in a school where you're cleaning the learning space yourself, where that respect for that learning space as well as your peers come to be able to go ahead and take on responsibility for what you're supposed to do at a very young age. I think that builds a lot of character.
See, I'm completely with you. So I also should qualify a couple of things. I'm a big Japan fan, even my own hairstyle, the way I live. I think a lot of what Japan has offered to the world. Even in our own school, if you look around, the Mary Kondo of minimalism, I often say we can do a Mary Kondo of curriculum also. You don't have to teach so much. You can declutter your. So Japan has a lot to offer culturally to the world, let alone the products and the brands. You know, it's quite amazing. People think America is soft power. Actually, no. America is soft power on useless things in life like junk food and Hollywood. The real contribution is there's one country which has made an impact in modern living. It's actually Japan. Your medical devices, your electronics, for example. Uh, Even fashion. Now there is an increasing trend. I was just counting the number of brands in India. I counted about 30 brands. I didn't realize it. When I went to Japan, I realized, oh, there are so many brands which we know. But we think America is influenced. Actually, no. It's actually Japan is influenced more the world. But coming back to your point, we also be very cautious when you look at Japan. Japan also has another side of, in a certain sense of servitude, certain sense of, very hierarchy culture. But there's some elements of beautiful in Japan, especially in primary schools. The thing you talked about, I think early on in children, let me rephrase this. Schools in Japan actually have created a curriculum out of school life. So traditionally, you look at a curriculum in a school, it's textbooks, assessments, activities. Japan doesn't look at it all. They say, when you step into a school, the way you live your life in a school is the curriculum. So be it the way you take care of your surroundings, be it the way you would have a sense of stewardship to your younger children, be it the way you take care of some of these schools routines. Like many Japanese schools don't have janitors. They don't have an idea of cleaning plates and becomes a clean plate. No, you want to do it yourself. And it's very powerful. And in school like ours, we're working hard to build that understanding in parents. Like next year onwards, we are trying to have a system where kids will clean their own plates. During official school hours, there is no janitors, kids will clean up, things like that. But just not the school, it's the community. For some of these things, when we think of extrapolating some of these models, be it Japan, Finland, Singapore, we got to think it's not about a school model, it's a community model, a way of living. For example, in Japan, if this school had been in Japan, the grade 4 kid would be told, okay, you have 20 grade 1 kids who live in your colony or your apartment complex. You're going to take them. So the kid would walk 20 minutes with those young children. But what does the community do? The entire community knows the traffic cop, the street vendor, the drivers. Everybody knows, oh, this is a bunch of school kids and this is the school, who are the chaperone who's going to take it. They will ensure that those 20 kids are safe. I think that collective consciousness of ensuring that children learn the right things beyond the boundaries of the school. That probably is going to take 100 years for most countries, including India, to get there. We probably had it when we had village schools, we had community-run schools. Even now, in some parts of the world, like you go to Oregon, you find some of these models available, but those are far and few. In an urban context, I think that's something you've lost. That how you have schools beyond the boundaries of the school. How the community supports children to learn this.
That's a very interesting point that you mentioned, because ultimately schooling has to be in sync with the society that we are in. India traditionally has had a system of gurukuls, and there was also a system where there was no privilege while you were in that environment of learning. Unfortunately, I've seen that sort of translate into the school life, where the privilege of coming from a certain background sort of reflects in students who are as young as in grades 6, 7, and 8. And it again escalates as we go further. What is your opinion about it? Like, do you think that school spaces should be egalitarian to that extent where whatever privilege that you come from while you're at home should not reflect in school?
So, before I answer your question, I just want to just share a comment on this Gurukul thing. See, I think we have to realize that traditionally, what data tells us, and there's a lot of documentation, even during as late as 17th century, 16th century, for example, there's a lot of documentation about how schools were in India. Of course, there's this idea of Gurukul, etc., but more importantly, we should recognize we have a bigger tradition of trade schools. Uh, when I say trade school, essentially means that in any village or a community, kids went to a certain school and they were focused on doing something. It's just not about memorizing abstract concepts. All those things also happened. But every trade specialist in that community provided something so that those kids have a certain skill. And of course, there is a Varna system which we had where if you come from a certain specialization, uh, due to your background, you further that down moving forward. So there is a deep expertise. Like you will be surprised how we are able to build some astounding sculptures, for example. The reason is that probably the sculptor would have come from generations of working in that form. It's passed on from family to family, and you see even in the modern world, some of the best products in the world today are family-run, multi-generational products.
Okay.
I was talking to somebody in Matala. They've been doing this for 4 generations now. Some of the world's best bankers are many generations. So that's what Japan is a classic example again. Those are family-run, where they pass on not just your genetic DNA, the intellectual DNA goes in so that the next generation makes it even better and better and better. So we should recognize in India we have trade schools. Because people, when they think of Gurukuls, there's a very different physical mental metaphor we have. Trade schools, we are very hands-on. But that we have lost. We're not hands-on anymore. An average Indian can't even fix a bulb, let alone paint the house, and we've lost the skill to live without depending on somebody else. To your answer, whether schools are egalitarian, actually that's primary purpose. Life is egalitarian, and schools are always a better reflection of what life should be. And in that sense, schools should be egalitarian. But unfortunately, in a country like India, where there is very poor investments in the quality of public schooling, unlike in the West, where we are also a poor nation, it's not about intent, it is also recognized that we are a young nation, and we are a young nation with very limited means. I mean, we often forget 75 years back when we got Kenya, even an average life expectancy was 32. You should be dead. Our probability of being dead is much higher if you're born in independence time. So we are that poor a nation. So public education was not a priority. You couldn't be because you're still poor. You're still trying to feed people to survive. So education is the last of the concerns. So it's going to be very difficult for a country like India to reach egalitarianism through schools. It's going to take a long, long time. The only hope to achieve egalitarianism is of private schools. One, of course, improve the quality of public school, which is going to take its own legacy time, which any large-scale reform would take. But the second is also around private schools playing the role of ensuring egalitarianism, by ensuring there's better diversity, by ensuring that there is better integration practices. Like a kid who comes from any socio-economic background should be able to read and write at the same level as a kid who comes from a very, let's say, third generation learner or a family with high economic needs, etc.
Interesting. So you mentioned hands-on experience, and coincidentally, we are sitting in a makerspace.
Yes.
Usually, you don't see makerspace in schools. I want to know the story behind this.
So, I'm glad you asked this question. But I should clarify, in the last 5-6 years, one of the things which I think they can't understand, the right reason, one could question the effectiveness, etc. That's true of any government intervention. But one thing I'm very excited about, among the many things I'm very upset about, but the government's push for ensuring that more hands-on work is very good. I think they started the tinkering labs. The idea to have a tinkering lab in a very traditional didactic structure like India is itself is very revolutionary. I think you should give credit to the government to do that. I think we don't talk about much about this. Today you will find engineering labs in many schools. So that's something which I want to clarify. But we did start because the government said this lab is about 9 years old. Much before many labs, schools started talking about robotics and things like that. So our vision behind the makerspace is that traditionally India has not had a track record of creating products for the world. We talked about Japan, but Japan is a monster when it comes to producing products for the world. So is US for that, one of the best coast technology products, especially. Italy, for example, great products. And some of these products are 150 years old. In fact, one of the interesting things is going to happen is that with time, these products are going to get more and more immortalized. I think it's called the Lazy's curve. I'm not sure what the technical term is. The longer they persist, the higher the probability they'll survive for eternity. Like, you don't want to find a replacement to Porsche.
Yeah.
You don't want to get a final replacement to Coca-Cola. Whatever you do, Coke is a Coke because it's last 100 years. So the premise is that Indians just don't produce products. So even our claim that a lot of parents, hey, we produce so many engineers, we produce the world's best technology companies. The answer is no, we don't produce the world's best technology companies. We produce at TCS, Infosys, they've done great job, there's no question. But we invent a Spotify or a Facebook or an Instagram or a WhatsApp, etc. Our claim to fame, some of these so-called new age tech companies, is actually a cheap rip-off what already has happened in the US in that sense. So even in the technology space, we don't have products. In the manufacturing space, we really have very few product development. I think there are some exceptions around two-wheeler automobiles, for example. I think you've done some great job in the world in terms of producing. But we're not pioneers in product making. The reason is that in school, we never make things apart from the occasional summer project or winter project which your parents do more than a child. The culture of prototype, culture of creating models and they fail again and again and again. We call it the habits of an artist. The idea that I make a product prototype, it fails, I get a critique, I rework. I get critique, I rework. So I keep doing multiple drafts and getting critique on it. So that mindset, for example, culture to fail, it's not about creating the final product, it's about failing multiple times to reach the final. Culture to apply design thinking to design any intervention or problem solution. So those are things we felt we don't have it in our culture because we don't talk about it in schools. We don't teach them in schools. So we then reached out to the world's best place where design thinking and product development is Stanford. So a lot of things that you see is from Stanford and an offshore center called IDEO. So we reached out to IDEO. IDEO then does put up entire curriculum for schools. And this is way back in 2014, 2013. So we really didn't have much references in India. Now there are a lot of organizations which are doing it, but way back we didn't have. We then had people from the US, we hired them full time. They stationed here for 4 years. And we had to build it ground up and integrate to our existing curriculum. And what you see is a product of some of their work. Today I'm really glad that we also train other teachers, we collaborate with other maker initiatives around the world. And a lot of every student has to build a couple of products every year. And there is an authentic audience to that product. They get an entire portfolio of how the product is built. The focus of assessment on those products is the process, not the outcome. So those are some other things which we have done. Now we've also created age-specific maker systems. Like this is a primary years thing where for young children, we don't have screens, so they don't get to see iPads, they don't get hooked to screens, but it's low screen but high tech, which means that you create a lot of manipulators. It doesn't require a screen interface, it's just about hands and eye coordination to construct basic computational thinking skills, basic logic, for example.
So problem solving.
Problem solving, for example, problem solving to manipulating materials. That's important. See, you can also do problems. So what are they? When I see traditional teachers and say we got to build problem solving, their argument is, hey, we also do math, we also do problem solving. I said no. Many are much problem solving in traditional school is very abstract, and that's why it disenfranchises most children. Because abstract thinking is not natural to human brains; it's a learned trait. So one odd genius who actually goes on to IIT or becomes an theoretical physicist is not the benchmark for all kids to be. No. So traditional education, and by the way, it's not India, but it's around the world, but it's more so in India, is very abstract. We place a lot of premium on abstract thinking, and not on physical manipulation. But great thinkers are actually physical doers.
Absolutely.
Abstract thinking is an outcome, right? So I tell teachers that yeah, problem solving, the problem should be around materials, should be around an authentic problem rooted in the community. And you should also have abundant opportunity to fail. Right now, the problem solving is a switch on or off.
Yeah.
No, there's no actually in real life. There is no on or off. There's no one right answer. Solutions would be a gray area, and it can be anywhere in that spectrum, depending on where the community is or where the end user is. So it's a lot more than problem solving. It is about being iterative to come up with a prototype, which the community is ready to accept.
Well, I've been hearing this, and I also relate to it to such an extent. So one of our mentors at One Young India is the co-founder at Postman API. He's a dear friend. We went to Pennsylvania, and he was that so these three co-founders never got any master's degree, and how they were coding, they were building products. They found out there was a problem in the way they were doing stuff. It wasn't efficient. They solved that problem. They got the first million users before they even made the first round of funding. Right now, I think they're valued at around $5-6 billion, and that's that one authentic product as an outlier, like you said, a tech product which is being used by, I think, practically every app developer in the world.
So there are
but right now,
coming out in it. But for a country so large as ours, we add one Australia every year.
Yeah.
That's the number of children being born in this country. We should have probably 20 times more such product. Because end of it, large countries like ours can't just depend on outsourced services work, can't just depend on cheap manufacturing. We got to have our own products to go out and export and create new jobs. That's the only salvation we have as civilizations.
Absolutely. So, this is a very interesting time we are living in. And that brings me, so unfortunately, I also had to let go a couple of people who were working with me because of the changes that have happened recently. Because their skills have become redundant. This was with respect to ChatGPT and these large language models coming. Now we have ChatGPT 4, people were saying, and you ask if ChatGPT 7 is going to be there in a couple of years. It does all the mundane tasks. It does things which are repetitive, but it does it beautifully, much more efficiently. At the same time, there is a concern regarding the use of AI in schools, in writing exams, So I am a strong believer that you build critical thinking when you write. When you look at things from a perspective which is not the norm. How do you think that such technologies are going to be impacting the school environment, the assignments, the written assignments, when it comes to, submitting an assignment in time? It's definitely impacting. So what's your take on it? Like how would a school like yours tackle this?
So school like us are pretty excited about ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Actually it depends on the foundational belief of what the role of an educator or a school is. So the response to your question depends on what is my assumption role. If a school thinks that my job is to disseminate knowledge and information, then of course you wonder why am I here for? Because what ChatGPT can do. In fact, in Heritage, what we did about 2 months back, we quickly formed a group of teachers, 30 practitioners from across campuses, We created a focus group. We also invited another 40 kids. And we gave 1 month time to all our senior school kids to freely use ChatGPT in classrooms, in your assignments, just to create a sandbox experience to figure out how does this work, right? So schools like ours, a traditional school, if they view that sharing information, sharing knowledge is the primary role of a teacher or a school, then I think time is numbered. I don't think he'll have a future in some years from now. But a school like ours, which view that teacher's role is not to give information, teacher's role is to be a facilitator, to critique, to provide feedback, to create a safe holding space for learning to happen, then they would view ChatGPT or any large language model based platforms. They would view them as aids. This way I would use a textbook, I would use internet, etc. Because it provides a lot of opportunities for kids to learn on their own. And it relieves the teacher of some of the mundane tasks and focus on what is more important, which is motivating the kids, providing larger directions, having coaching conversations, and most important is building motivation. Right? In fact, I can talk at least for 3 hours about the different dimensions of when you think of AI in schools. In fact, the other day I was watching a video of Salman Khan from Khan Academy.
They've integrated
very. I was just telling my teachers in one of the commerce workshops just a couple of days back that you could actually see the chatbot give customized feedback the way teachers would.
Yeah.
Right. Of course, you can see through the shallowness of it. But what Salman Khan tells in the video that this is just work for 4 weeks. I can't wait what will happen in 40 weeks.
Yeah.
It's just going to compound so a child actually can have a very safe, non-judgmental conversation at the pace which the child would like with a chat bot with an intent to improve one's understanding any topic. And that's the role of a teacher in that sense. But what the chatbot won't provide is the motivation. See, people forget that. Let me rephrase this. So, AI is there to transform, there's no question, and the role of teachers have to change in traditional schools, etc. But let's also not forget that just because it's an AI, that doesn't mean learning is going to happen. Right? For any learning to happen, there should be 3 conditions. One is the I, the learner. One is the teacher. It could be the AI, it could be any business, it could be the educator. And third is what education psychologists call the it. It's I, though, it. It is essentially the engagement required for you and me to start working together to solve that problem or learn a topic. In the intersection of this I, though, it, where learning happens, and we reflect back in any learning, these 3 things should be there. The learner, the educator, and the educator could be a resource, could be a website, could be a book, could be an experience, and there is it, which is the engagement and the motivation required to be there. So having an AI box doesn't guarantee them. Just the way having a Wikipedia page. So when I went to university for my second master's, Wiki had come in 4 years back. So every professor was like, what the heck? We had to spend hours in the library to do referencing, and you guys can just go to Wiki, and which you can actually think of it. Now you see Wiki is so standard and mundane, but back in those days, it was a revolutionary idea that I can search anything. I can get this one. In fact, Wiki also gives you the reference at the end. For a researcher, you probably saved 8 months of work. It's referencing, which otherwise used to happen physically. And those people who are associate professors' jobs are lost, research jobs are not, the Wiki is there. But I think what Wiki can't do is motivation.
Absolutely.
So my response to you is that AI will change, but AI will change in the area of how do you learn. But the role of motivation, engagement, relevance, peer learning, all that the school will still continue to provide and should provide. And schools will be able to see the distinction and able to focus their trainings and their DNA more towards the human aspects of learning. They will have a relevance. Otherwise, it will not. Also, one more thing about technology. I'm sorry, I'm giving a very longer response to it. Bill Gates actually says, and I've seen this in the last decade and a half, whenever technology comes into education. Bill Gates often says this, that you often overestimate the impact of technology in the short run and underestimate the impact of it in the long run. And I've seen this happen several times whenever new technology comes in. Oh, this technology is coming, it's going to change everything tomorrow. Doesn't happen that way. Often you will actually find in another 3-4 years' time, ChatGPT will just be seen as just another this one. So you probably overestimate. Like driverless cars, 7 years back, a lot of people genuinely assumed that all cab drivers are going to lose their jobs. But today you're being very realistic. It's not going to happen for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Because driving is actually far more complex than any AI can master. There's too much of dynamics involved, judgment involved in it. I don't think anybody is now saying driverless and cars. Even I think Elon Musk is even talking about driverless cars now because there's too much of risk involved in it. But will driverless car happen? It will happen, but not at the pace in which we think it's going to happen. So my sense is ChatGPT, will it impact education? Yes, it will impact, but not at the pace we think it's going to happen. There is still time for the last mile connections to be sorted out before it can make any meaningful impact in student learning.
No, absolutely. I think what you mentioned is so refreshing to hear because I was having to look at the admit cards of the students, and this time it specifically mentioned that you cannot use ChatGPT, if I'm not wrong. Is that right?
Yes.
ChatGPT was mentioned in the admit cards. So that was mentioned on the admit cards that you cannot use that.
In the which context?
CBSE.
CBSE exams.
Yes, CBSE exams. And I was like, see, I have had open book exams. Why is it that you cannot use that? And within that context, I at least feel that now we need to be more seamless in our ability to transition between the role of a teacher and a learner. And it needs to go hand in hand. There are certain questions where I have experimented with ChatGPT. I asked it, like, why were the first cars left-handed? It didn't have an answer. It required certain sort of critical thinking, connecting the dots. It may or may not have that, but yes, like you said, like, to use it as a tool is something that we have to get efficient at and to look at it in that sense. But within that context, the teachers also feel threatened at times. I feel that teachers today need to be as much as a student first. So the teachers need to be student first. They should not be afraid to get messy, right? If they're confused, like normally what happens is the student asks me certain things and then I don't have an answer to that, and I don't hesitate saying, see, I don't know if I have an answer to that right now. Let me go back and search it, right? Let me go back and research about it. I don't see that in the traditional setting. How do you think that teachers should cope up with this sort of an environment where information is readily available, where questions are going to be shot at them for which they may not know answers to? What advice do you have?
First thing first, one of the things which we talk a lot about is it's okay to not know everything. Right? The world is far more complex place. It was not as binary the way it was even 120 years back. It's a very complex place. So there is a lot of strength and courage, actually good prototyping to our children to go tell our children, hey, I don't know, I'll get back to you. Right? So I often say with our teachers also that students have to be leaders of their learning process, and teachers, students of the teaching process. That's a good school. So students should be leaders of how they want to learn, what they want to learn, why they want to learn. And teachers have to be students of the teaching practice. If you don't have the mindset of a leader, then you're not then schools are not doing any service to our children. Right? And students see through, by the way.
Yeah.
Any kid, even by grade 2, you know what's saying, even primary school kids actually knows a teacher faffing her way through, or his way through. And students love teachers who say, I know. I think the best way for a teacher to build a relationship and connect is being vulnerable, being authentic, and say, I don't know, I'll figure it out. And there you're prototyping what a good leader should do and would do. In fact, today I would say any leader who says all the answers, run away.
Absolutely.
You want leaders to say, hey, I don't know, we'll figure it out together. So my view or advice to fellow educators is, first, it's okay if you don't. Frankly, even Bill Gates or ChatGPT founders actually have no clue how the future is going to look like. So we're all in the same boat.
Yeah.
Right? Everything you talk about how AI is going to influence the decades to come is still a hypothesis. So don't worry for not knowing. You can only work around probabilities, and you respond to those probabilities and to minimize variables around those probabilities. Second, the whole purpose of teaching actually is learn. And it's a great opportunity for us to learn something. ChatGPT is going to teach us, help us to do it. Just the way kids have figured out how to use ChatGPT, you can also figure out as an educator, how do I design better assessments so the students don't use ChatGPT. Third, always remember, technology only amplifies what you have. Right? It is not that, and it's very important to understand this. If you have a bad teaching practice in your classroom, if you use technology, it only amplifies that bad teaching practice. I often joke, many schools today have laptops issued and a protector issued. Now, if the teacher uses the archaic didactic method of reading from a textbook, all the teacher has done through technology is instead of reading from a textbook, they put the PDF of the textbook on a screen and you get kids to read from the projector. Essentially, just amplified a bad practice. Right? If a teacher still uses, let's say, the traditional method of, blueprint, question paper, grade 3, have the right answers, instead of writing, you ask them to type, and you probably make the correction in Google Docs. Right? But it's still a bad practice, as against the open-ended assessment, for example. So whatever you do, if it is bad, technology amplifies. But if you do good things, technology will also amplify those good things. So technology is an amplifier. It is not going to make your teaching good or bad. So if you do good things like, for example, open assessments, or instead of having one MCQ, having open-ended questions in itself, or instead of creating, showing a textbook there, having kids to read in small groups and making them make a presentation, for example, then technology aims. That's the role of ChatGPT also. That if you use it to ask kids to memorize data from history and put it, asking you ask questions like yourself, like you give an example, hey, what is the origin of left hand right? Yeah. That's a beautiful question. Asking and saying, okay, which is the first country to do left hand writing? Of course, the kid will find out from ChatGPT or from Google for that matter. But we ask, why did countries move to left and right? That you can't. It's going to take another level of research to get there. Right? So the answer lies not in technology alone. Answer lies in your practice. What kind of assessments you ask? How do you assess kids? How do you teach kids? How do you want kids to learn? If you do those things right, technology will help you.
Absolutely. This reminds me of a beautiful quote. Let me recall. I think it's by Eric Hoffer. He says that in times of change, the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with the world that no longer exists. Now, we cannot be afraid to learn, which is why I think that we need to move beyond literacy to now the constant ability to learn, which at least we're trying to call as learn disciplines. That said, there are still these inhibitions when it comes to parents. Oh, what is my child going to do if they don't score in an exam? What is my child going to do if they don't go into a particular career? Now, at least from my experience, I've seen that you could be an economist or you could be a political science student, and if you're not aware about what's happening in tech world, you really don't understand how this functions. Similarly, if you are somebody who is a techie but does not have an understanding of how economics and politics functions, you are missing out on a lot. But I understand at the same time, this being said, that it's very difficult to make parents understand. How do you and your school deals with that? You know, making the parents understand as to, please trust us with what we're doing. Probably we're still figuring out with the VUCA word, but you need to be open to that. So how do you deal with it?
See, it's a great question, and it's one of the topics very close to my heart. I often say that schools like Heritage actually are there not for the kids. The purpose of school like Heritage is to help teachers and parents involved, and kids are just an excuse. Because you can't run a good school if you don't expand the consciousness of teachers and parents, the adults in the child's life. Right? And the challenge is, of course, parents would largely come from a fear of scarcity. And you can't blame them. We are also products of a certain life in our nation. That scarcity has been our experience. And hence there's a certain fear. So everything you operate from a fear of scarcity, not from the sense of abundance. Right? So we're used to knowing that there is a competitive cutoff, there's entrance exams. At least now it's not the case, but even 10 years back, many of these parents today, when they were children, they know when they get a landline phone, you got to wait for 3 years. There is absolute competition out there, right? So it's winners take it all. There is a win-lose this one. But I think the role of a school to help parents understand the world has changed. In fact, the probability of a child's success is more through collaboration than competition. And there is abundant opportunities available in it. And that happens to working with parents in workshops to letting them understand. And schools like Heritage do invest. In fact, there's a contract and the parent signs to put their child in our school. They have to sign a contract which says that you've got to attend minimum 14 days of training every year, the next 14 years. They join in nursery till grade 12. Then you have to put yourself through these trainings, these workshops, we call it sambans, these dialogue sessions, so that you also unlearn and question some of these assumptions you have about life and learning. That's my view on this one. Unfortunately, what's also happened is schools are also, I'm not saying all schools, in fact, but there are many new age schools, for example. My worry is they also become very parent friendly. In the sense, there is this mindset of customer orientation. There's a mindset that, oh, if a parent feels bad, I have to play to the game. And that's very dangerous. Schools can't respond to parents' fears. Schools have to respond to what is important to the child. And what's important to the child may not be in sync with the parent's immediate fear. Immediate parents fear, oh, my child is not memorizing the table. Oh, child is not able to sing a song when my family comes. Child is not able to memorize tables 25 to 25 by the time grade 3 happens. Child is not able to sing in the choir. There's a lot of these fears parents are driven by. But a good school knows that these are not very harmful for a kid. You got to do certain things at the right age at the right time. Like for example, forcing kids to memorize grammar early on, or helping kids to write in a four-line cursive writing is so dangerous. You might get kids with good handwriting, but you lose kids who can be authors in the future, can be great writers with a voice in the future. So schools have to take the call, what is the short-term gain I'm going to surrender for long-term gains. And they have to do that where they're loyal to the children, not to the parents. One of my professors at Harvard Kennedy School often says the difference between a private hospital and a public hospital is that when you go to a private hospital, this is a paper on public policy, how societies organize themselves on public goods like education, health, etc. In health, what happens is that when I go to a private hospital, most often the private doctor if you go with a fever or headache or some ailment, what does the private doctor do? He actually recommends some tablets because he has to show to you that I've done something. I've assuaged your pain or reduced your. But you go to public doctor, you go to the AIMS, the doctor most likely will say, "I don't do anything, just have salt water." Because he is not under pressure to actually give you medication which has side effects. And he's also not under pressure to make you feel happy. He just wants to give you what is right. He wants to save you money, he doesn't want to give you unnecessary test. But a private doctor will give you 100 tests to do. Except, I'm not saying all tests are bad, I'm not saying all private doctors, but this is a research. It's largely say that private doctors tend to overdo things, not in the intent of health in the long run, but essentially to get rewards in the short term from the patient. A public doctor may not say, "Hey, don't do anything. Just have these, medication, no test, come back later." Right? So it's a trade-off where a patient has to think what is good at what point. I'm not saying what is good, right? But schools also in the same situation. A lot of schools are under pressure to play to the gallery what parents expect them to do. Classic example is inclusion. If you talk about egalitarianism, right? Many schools in India don't take children with learning deficiencies. Why? They don't want to be seen in the public. Oh, I have 5 kids with autism. Because these 5 kids with autism will pass on bad habits to other typical kids. And the other parents will put pressure on us. "Hey, why are you having these kids? Put them in another section. I don't want my child to do it right." Well, that's so common in this country. Right? But the school has to say no. I will have kids with autism in my class for 2 reasons. Not just because these autistic kids also need to have a shot, that's my role as a school. But also, I know more than the kids with autism, it is typical children learn more from kids from autism because they learn more from diversity than anything else. Those are some of the brave calls schools have to take and not succumb to parental pressure.
No, absolutely. I think what you just said, it resonates with me so much. So one of my mentors, so I went to DPS Archipuram. At that time, the principal was Dr. Sharma Chona. And I've seen her daughter, Tamanna, and she runs the school. So I usually keep on visiting, very often, even right now, for the fairs that happen. I saw her grow with us in the school, taking that role actively. I think at the end of the day, you are going to live in a society where you're going to have people who may have certain disabilities or special abilities, and you need to be able to deal with them. And you need to be able to deal with yourself to be not in that sort of a mindset that you are too, let's say, reclusive or let's say too closed about a certain opinion. So I think what you're saying is definitely essential, and that is where egalitarian, equity, inclusiveness, which I saw outside the board, and one of the, I think 5-6 pillars. So one of them is also inclusiveness.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So I think we've already spent quite some time, but before we part, a bit controversial, but I still want to take your views on that. The new education policy. Great suggestions with respect to using n number of methods. Experiential learning is also mentioned there. Hands-on learning is mentioned there. Do you think our Indian education system is ready to take that on, absorb that? And if yes, how much time do you think it's going to take before we see that reflect in the standardized Indian education system?
See, I can answer your second part of your question, how much time, God only knows. But it was a broad benchmark. I have seen Howard Gardner, my professor at Harvard. He once made a visit to India about 10 years back, and he famously came to the Times of India headline. He said it's going to take 100 years for Indian education system to reform. Of course, he took his words back when he met us, when he came back to the US. He said, "Well, just leave a broad number, nobody knows." But I think the point he's trying to make is, India is a very complex country. It is an European Union and an American if you put together. That's our level of diversity we have. It's actually very unfair to amortize the entire levels of India and say, oh, Indian education system. It's like saying how good Indian cuisine is. And there's nothing about Indian cuisine. I mean, because the traditional definition of Indian cuisine says Delhi, Punjabi cuisine. No, I mean, we put northeast, southwest. There's nothing on Indian cuisine. I think now the world is waking up. Oh, that is a diversity. That's what Bollywood.
Yeah.
Well, Indian cinema is not. It's not Bollywood. It's
Yeah.
thanks to the last couple of years of performances of successful movies and art from other parts of the country. You know, there's a larger diversity, and that's so true of. I say in conferences often. In Indian education system, you can make any statement, and you can prove that to be right, and in the next breath, you can say that's completely wrong. Right? We are also a nation which produces the world's 1% of the world's top talent. At the same time, we also produce the world's largest unskilled and out of school children in the world. I mean, these are contradictions so wide. Of course, we get enamored by Sundar Pichais and Satya Nadella's of the world. I often say they are the biggest curse that has happened to Indian education system because they can hijack the required narrative. But how do you en masse skill most of Indian children who actually get disenfranchised? Here, how many security guards we have here in our school? This is such a small campus. I probably have 18 of them at any point in time. Not because I need so much, but because they're available cheap. And that is such a sad reflection of the country. And we will have a serious democratic time bomb if we don't get them the right skills so that they can find vocations which match their potential. So that's my response. I don't know how long it's going to take, but we have a long task and we've got to put everybody's effort to ensure that most of our children are skilled. And coming back to your first part of question, NEP, I've said this in several forums. I was very pleasantly surprised by the pragmatism and also some structural changes which NEP has promised. So we have to recognize that this is an education policy, it's not an act, right? But in the policy, they've also outlined some broad directional decisions which will have impact 20, 30, 40 years from now. And those are transformation. So you can cut out a lot of the jargons and some of the, things you got to say because it's the right to say, but you also have to acknowledge that for such a large, diverse country like India, where our country has never had historically priority on education. We've never had, I want people to understand this, and I say this often, that we have obsession with higher education. I think it's the Soviet model. I respect Nehru a lot. I think we owe to Nehru the way the federal structure get built. But some mistakes he made apart from poor economic decisions. He's also this poor construct of how education should happen. Like his obsession with heavy engineering and higher education is a killer. It shouldn't have happened for us because it became a very niche. I know you come from BITS, you come from a very top engineering schools, but frankly, for a large nation like ours, more important than IITs and BITS is high quality primary education schools. That's what Japan did. You don't know of top Japanese schools, do you?
Absolutely not.
You go to any top industrialized nation in the world, they're not known for higher education, they're known for education. Some of the brightest kids in Germany and Singapore don't go to IITs or they actually go to vocational colleges because they get much better paid than and graduate would do. We have produced a nation that's actually the very old Russian model because Russia loves USSR loves high impact projects like big dams, big space things. So that's why we're obsessed with ISRO and we're obsessed with. I'm not saying they're not right, but it's controversial. But think about it. More than ISRO, more than IITs, temples of modern India are not those. Temples of modern India is high quality primary school, high quality early child care in every village. That didn't happen for 16 odd years. And that was, we should be ashamed of what we've done to generation. When you see a 25-year-old or 30-year-old serving in a marriage function, where there are 400 guests and there are 100 of these guys floating around, look around. I want every Indian to look around, urban privileged Indian to look around. When you go to a restaurant or a marriage, Look at how many loose hands just walking around. Why they're cheap? Look at the number of guards we have in because they're cheap. Because they just don't have jobs. Because we've not skilled them. And so that's research. So anybody's corrected some of these things. What are the three, four broad directional things they've done? One, they have emphasized on early child care, which is the most important thing to do. Remember, in education public policy, the most important years in the life cycle of a learner is the first 6 years. It's not higher education, it's not college, it's not even high school. It's the first 6 years. You do the things right from a nutritional, emotional, basic foundational literacy and numeracy. Then you get everything right. Why does vocational in India fail? We focus on vocational in the last 15 years. Most of the last 9, 10 years. Why does it fail? Because vocational and higher education pays is too late. You can go put kids in any engineering college. Most of engineering kids don't do well. Why? They don't have foundational skills. What are you going to teach them? You can teach them public speaking skills, but that's not employability skills. Employability skills, reading, writing, abstract reasoning, creativity. That happens in primary. So they have focused on that. Second thing is they have removed high-stake testing from grade 10 and 12. They removed 10th. Grade 10 exam is the worst invention which have put on Indian kids. Poor kids, how many kids, 6 years back, I don't remember the year, in the state of Telangana, grade 10 results were announced. You would have read the papers. The software company which has announced the results, there's an error in the code. It announced 25, 28 kids. No, it announced many kids has failed when they've actually passed. In that evening, 28 kids committed suicide. Grade 10. Imagine the kind of pressure we put on our children. Why? You and I know grade 10 has no impact in your life. Thankfully, this policy removes the unit assessments, but it doesn't have to be high stake the way it is. So they remove those. Third, thank God, this NEP differentiates curriculum bodies from testing bodies. Indians don't seem to understand. For the last 75 years, we have something like a CBSE or a state board, it doesn't matter, but largely CBSE because it is in some ways a national curriculum. It is not a curriculum teaching body, it's actually a testing body. So the fate of our children's learning experiences is in the hands of a body whose core DNA and purpose is not to teach, it's actually to test. CBSE's mandate is not to know whether a child has understood, greenhouse effect or leadership or mythology. No, it is to understand in grade 12 again the set blueprint as a kid done well or not. So for an organization with that DNA, how do you expect that organization to think about pedagogy, learning, project-based and nothing? So what even in the US, the testing agency is different from the curriculum bodies.
Correct.
So that's the distinction we got to make. CBSE used to one point in time used to test for MPBS entrance, IIT entrance. I'm sure in your time CBSE.
AI, I think your medical exams used to be conducted by.
So CBSE's entire focus is to do test drill. I mean, think about it.
Oh, absolutely. I think what you just mentioned is so appropriate. So I think you said like demographic disaster. So there's fine line between demographic dividend and a disaster. Hopefully, NEP is in the right direction, but I've also noticed a very interesting dichotomy in the Indian society. When you mentioned about private schools and higher education, that obsession with higher education, I fail to understand that why is it's parents want their child to be in a private school while they are, let's say, in the K-12 space, and that same child aspires to be in a government-run institution.
You got it wrong, right?
Yeah.
It's around. So if you think about it, all advanced nations,
Yeah.
that's because of their obsession with higher education. I think as a country, the founding fathers of the first son is 5-year plans, we just got it completely wrong. I really wish we looked at Japan during the Meiji Restoration. I mean, history is very important. It's a great teacher. During Meiji Restoration, that's a time when they moved from a traditional agrarian society into an industrialized nation. Of course, they also had streaks of nationalism, imperialistic ideals, etc., that resulted in World War II. But as a nation, they reformed in one generation from a poor, impoverished agrarian economy to a powerful industrialization country. when the transformation happened, the Japanese government spent 26% of the GDP on education, primary education.
And what do we spend? 2%? Not even 2%.
So that 2% includes
That's the entire church, I think.
education.
Yeah.
Right? So we flipped it. You're completely right. So if you go to the US or any advanced nation, public school is a norm till grade 12. Essentially, it's free. It's egalitarian. You don't have to pay for it. You don't have to. You got to pay for the higher end. Because the higher end is not for everybody.
Yeah.
You can't have everybody go to high. You don't need to also. Right? But it's the other way around here. You pay through your nose for your school, and college is virtually free in most places. Of course, a lot of private colleges come now, but typically we notice your Delhi universities or your Madras University, Bombay University, etc. The fees is a fraction of what you pay. Of course, it's changing. I'm not saying no, but in my times, you could probably get to an IIT with $3,000, but you pay probably much more money to get it. So the point of you're right. I think we got to reorient, and I think NEP is doing that. It is trying to focus on another monumental decision the government has made is they're doing independent benchmarking of foundation reading and writing, which is, I think, phenomenal. Because one of the things in our country, in education especially, we rarely collect data. We rarely use data to take decisions around policies. We just don't. If one minister or a set of bureaucrats think that we're going to move away from this CCE model in grade 10 to board exams, it's just not rational. We still don't have data of how many kids commit suicide during exams, frankly. We don't have data on health. We don't have data on how much kids can know what. Of course, there are independent NGOs that do it, but the state doesn't do it. For the first time, they have instituted an institution which is just going to collect foundational data on reading, writing, and arithmetic. The three pillars. In grade, I think, grade 1, grade 3, grade 6. These are not board exams. Because board exams are assessments of learning. These are assessments for learning, which will inform teaching practices, policy practices, etc. So in that sense, so these are some of the things which NEP has done a phenomenal thing. I only wish they promoted more private investments into education, because now that you know you can't expand your 2% of your budgetary allocation into education, at least allow well-intentioned private players into education, so that I think there is more money coming into the sector, so that more opportunities for people.
But do you think that has also sort of backfired with these edtech startups? You know, I mean, all credits to some of them.
I think why there is a edtech startup bust.
Yeah.
It is because we still don't allow for-profit K-12 and college fees. So if you are me or entrepreneur, which you are, for example, why did you think of starting a school?
It's difficult. It's like
Yeah,
you are
like-
in that entire system where you would have to be a not-for-profit. And
So you have to either come from so much money that you don't care about returns
yeah.
as a philanthropist, or you got to be the shady guy who's a builder or a politician connected guy or an ex-bureaucrat, not an ex-bureaucrat to start a school, because they know how to skill the system.
Yeah.
But a genuine youngster who wants to change the nation through building schools, how many of you don't know? So what you do, you start startups and in the ancillary space. So a lot of the money which could have gone to K-12 schools or earlier centers is actually being diverted to what ancillary spaces where legally you're allowed to make profits.
Correct.
And profit making is a genuine need of any entrepreneur.
Yeah.
You can't take that away. I mean, you don't have a profit motive, but you have a profit making.
Absolutely.
Right. So one reason why the after-school edtech market is booming is because they can't go to K-12. That's a challenge. Like people like you don't set up schools, but you set up other things to support schools.
Yes.
Because you're not allowed to set up schools.
Because again, there's so much bureaucracy and
That's the whole thing. They don't want you to set up schools.
Right. Interesting. There's so much to learn.
Yes.
So I think that we can definitely keep on talking about this for hours at a stretch. But we'll keep it, we'll take a pause here. probably continue this
Absolutely.
in another session sometime. It was a pleasure talking to you, Vishnu. I wish you and the school and all your endeavors best of luck. And I really hope that the sort of revolution that you're trying to bring in the Indian education system, specifically not just the Indian education system, the education system abroad, is replicated by schools, parents at home, and students who don't have access to facilities like yourselves.
Thank you so much, Pagas, for your time and my best wishes to One Young India and the work we're doing. I really hope to see more of you and your team working with young children. And, in a country as large as ours, we need every kind of people, especially organizations like yourself, uh, helping our children reach their potential. I really wish you all the very best. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.